Part 1. The Silent Drift. Veltari pressed her face against the cracked viewing port of her dying research pod, staring into the endless black void that had become her prison. The stars looked so far away now, like tiny pinpricks of light mocking her from across impossible distances. She had been counting the days at first, marking each one on her data pad, but somewhere around day 400 she had stopped caring about numbers. 18 cycles. That's how long it had been since everything went wrong. She remembered that day clearly. Her team had been so excited about the dark matter experiment. They thought they were about to unlock one of the universe's greatest mysteries. The HFY were known throughout their sector as brilliant researchers, always pushing the boundaries of science. They lived for discovery, spending most of their lives alone in laboratories and research stations, diving deep into complex theories that other species couldn't even understand. But this time, they had pushed too far. The explosion had torn through their research station like it was made of paper. Veltari barely made it to her emergency pod before the entire facility was sucked into what looked like a hole in space itself. She watched through her tiny window as her home, her work, and everyone she had ever known disappeared into nothing. Now, she floated in the space between star systems, where no trade routes passed and no explorers ever came. Her pod had been designed for short emergency trips, maybe a few days at most. The life support systems were never meant to keep someone alive. For over a year, the air recycler wheezed and stuttered, making terrible grinding noises that kept her awake during her sleep cycles. The temperature control had failed months ago, leaving her shivering in the constant cold. Worst of all, the water purification system was down to its last few drops. She had been rationing everything for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to drink without measuring every sip. Her food had run out 3 weeks ago. Veltari knew she was dying. She could feel her body getting weaker each day, her thoughts becoming fuzzy and slow. Sometimes she would stare at the walls of her tiny pod and forget where she was or how she had gotten there. The isolation was eating away at her mind just as surely as the failing systems were killing her body. The HFY were used to being alone, but this was different. This was the kind of loneliness that crushed your soul. She activated her distress beacon one more time, even though she knew it was pointless. The signal was so weak now that it probably wouldn't travel more than a few thousand kilometers before fading into background radiation. Even if someone did pick it up, who would bother to investigate? She was in the middle of nowhere, far from any civilized worlds. The beacon sent out its pathetic little pulse over and over. "Help me, please. Anyone." Veltari closed her eyes and tried to remember what her homeworld had looked like before she left for the research station. Purple skies, silver trees that sang in the wind, the smell of the crystalline flowers that grew outside her childhood home. She held on to these memories like precious treasures, afraid that when they faded, the last part of her people would die with her. Then her sensor board chirped. Her eyes snapped open. The display showed something impossible. A massive object was approaching her position at incredible speed. The energy signature was unlike anything in her databases. It wasn't HFY technology, and it definitely wasn't from any of the other species she knew about. The vessel was huge, easily 1,000 times larger than her tiny pod, and it was heading straight for her. Veltari's heart started beating faster than it had in months. After all this time alone in the dark, something had finally found her. Part 2. The Impossible Choice. Captain Lee Day rubbed his tired eyes and took another sip of his cold coffee. It had been a long day on the bridge of the New Dawn, and they were still 3 weeks away from completing their survey mission in this remote sector of space. The crew had been mapping uncharted star systems for months now, looking for planets that might support human colonies in the future. It was quiet, routine work, the kind that made some crew members complain about being bored. Day preferred it that way. In his 20 years of space travel, he had learned that exciting usually meant dangerous, and dangerous usually meant people got hurt. Communications Officer Kim Yeon was hunched over her console, fine-tuning the long-range sensors for the 100th time that day. She was young, maybe 25, and still got excited about every little blip on her screens. Most of the time it turned out to be space debris or radiation from distant stars, but she never stopped looking. "Captain," Yeon called out, her voice suddenly sharp with attention. "I'm picking up something weird." Day set down his coffee and walked over to her station. The bridge was small compared to military vessels, but it felt like home after all these years. Every button, every screen, every sound was familiar to him. What kind of weird? It's a distress signal, but the pattern is completely unknown. Not human, not from any of the species in our databases. Yeon's fingers danced across her controls, trying to clean up the signal. "It's very faint, sir. Whatever's sending it is either very far away or running on almost no power." Chief Engineer Park Myung looked up from his tablet, where he had been reviewing the ship's maintenance schedule. He was an older man, probably close to retirement, with the kind of steady hands and calm voice that made everyone feel safer during emergencies. "How far are we talking about, Yeon?" She ran the calculations quickly. "About 4 days' travel at maximum speed, but, Captain, that would take us completely off our survey route. We'd lose at least 2 weeks of mission time, maybe more." Navigator Kim Hana turned in her chair to face them. She was Day's second in command, smart and careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. "Captain, we need to consider the risks here. We don't know anything about whoever sent that signal. They could be hostile, this could be a trap. Or they could be pirates," added Security Chief Kang Seo from his position near the tactical station. He was the youngest officer on the bridge, but he had good instincts. "Some species use fake distress calls to lure in rescue ships." Day nodded. Understanding their concerns, these were all good points, the kind of logical thinking that kept crews alive in deep space. But as he stared at the weak signal on Yeon's screen, he couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. Someone out there was dying, alone in the darkness between stars. "How long has the signal been transmitting?" he asked. Yeon checked her readings. "Based on the degradation pattern, I'd say at least several months, maybe longer." "Sir, whatever's out there, they've been waiting for help for a very long time." The bridge fell quiet. Everyone knew what that meant. No one survived in space for months without a proper ship. Whoever was sending that signal was probably down to their last few hours of life support, if they were even still alive. Engineer Myung was the first to speak. "Captain, I can have the engines ready for maximum speed in 30 minutes, but Hana's right about the risks. We don't know what we're flying into." "We could send a probe first," suggested Seo. "Get a better look at the situation before we commit the whole ship." "That would take even longer," Yeon pointed out. "By the time we send a probe and get the data back, whoever's out there might be dead." Day looked around at his crew. These people had been with him for years. They trusted his judgment and he trusted theirs. They were raising valid concerns, the kind that any responsible captain should consider. Command school had taught him to weigh risks carefully, to think about the safety of his own crew first. But as he stared at that faint distress signal, he knew there was really only one choice. "We respond," he said simply. "Set course for the signal's origin. Maximum speed." Tuttheby. Crew exchanged glances, but nobody argued. They knew their captain, and they knew he wouldn't ask them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. "You heard the captain," Hana said, already plotting their new course. "Let's go save somebody." As the new dawn changed direction and accelerated toward the unknown, Day thought about something his first captain had told him years ago. In the vast emptiness of space, no one should have to die alone. It was a simple rule, but it had guided every decision he had made since then. Part 3. Against All Odds. The first thing Captain Day saw when they reached the distress signal was how small the alien pod looked against the vastness of space. It tumbled slowly, end over end, like a piece of space junk that someone had forgotten about. But as they got closer, he could see the hull was cracked in dozens of places, held together by what looked like emergency patches and sheer luck. "My God," whispered Navigator Hana from her station. "How long has someone been surviving in that thing?" Dr. Choi Jin was already suited up and heading for the emergency bay, his medical kit slung over his shoulder. He was the kind of doctor who had seen everything during his career, but even he looked worried as he studied the readings on his tablet. "Captain, I'm reading extremely faint life signs. Whoever's in there is barely hanging on." Engineer Myung's voice crackled over the comm from the engine room. "Sir, that pod is falling apart. The moment we try to bring it aboard, it's going to break into pieces. The structural integrity is almost zero." Day felt his stomach tighten. They had come all this way, risked their mission timeline, and now they might watch someone die right in front of them because their rescue pod was too damaged to save. "What are our options, Myung?" "We need to use the transport beam, but that's risky. The pod's hull is interfering with our sensors. I can't get a clean lock on whoever's inside." Communications Officer Yeon was bent over her console, sweat beading on her forehead as she tried to penetrate the pod's failing systems. "I'm trying to boost our sensor resolution, but the interference is incredible. It's like trying to see through a sandstorm." Security Officer Seo had joined Dr. Jin in the emergency bay, and his voice came through the comm system with obvious tension. "Captain, we need to move fast. I can see cracks spreading across the pod's hull just from our ship's gravitational field. It's not going to hold together much longer." Day made a quick decision. "Jin, how long do you need to set up a compatible atmosphere?" "For an unknown alien species, at least 20 minutes, maybe 30. I need to analyze their biology. First, figure out what they breathe, what kind of pressure they need." "We don't have 30 minutes, Myung called out. "That pod is going to come apart in the next 10 minutes, maybe less." Dr. Jin ran his hands through his hair, thinking fast. "Okay, I can create a general life support bubble, something that should work for most carbon-based life forms. But if I'm wrong about their biology, bringing them aboard could kill them just as fast as leaving them out there." "Do it," Day ordered. "Yeon, I need you to lock onto those life signs the moment Jin gives us the go-ahead." The next few minutes felt like hours. Dr. Jin worked frantically in the emergency bay, adjusting atmospheric controls and setting up medical equipment for a patient he had never seen before. Engineer Myung rerouted power from non-essential systems to boost the transport beam, knowing they would only get one chance at this. "Hull breach on the pod," Seo reported. "I can see atmosphere venting from multiple locations." "Almost there," Jin called out. 30 more seconds." Yeon's voice was tight with concentration. "Life signs are getting weaker. Heart rate is dropping." "Fast, got it," Jin shouted. "Emergency bay is ready. General life support is active." "Yeon now," Day ordered. "I'm trying to lock on, but the interference is still too strong." "Wait, I think I've got something." Her fingers flew over her controls, trying to isolate the alien's life signs from all the electronic noise coming from the dying pod. Suddenly, the pod started breaking apart. Pieces of hull plating spun away into space, and atmosphere rushed out in glittering clouds of ice crystals. "There!" Yeon shouted. "I've got a lock!" The transport beam activated just as the pod completely disintegrated. For a terrifying moment, Day wasn't sure if they had been fast enough. Then Dr. Jin's voice came over the comm, filled with relief and amazement. "We got her! She's alive!" Day rushed to the emergency bay, where he found Dr. Jin kneeling beside, a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. The alien was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to take up half her face. She was gasping in the artificial atmosphere, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to breathe. "Is she going to be okay?" Day asked. Dr. Jin was already running his medical scanners over her body. "Her physiology is similar enough to ours that the general life support is working. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but she's breathing and her heart is beating. I think she's going to make it." The alien's large eyes suddenly focused on Captain Day. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper in a language none of them understood. Her expression was one of complete confusion, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. "She's probably wondering why we saved her," Seo said quietly. Day knelt down beside the alien, making sure she could see his face. He spoke slowly and gently, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. "You're safe now. We're going to take care of you." The alien stared at him for a long moment, her large eyes filled with something that looked like wonder. Then exhaustion overtook her, and she fell unconscious, finally able to rest after months of fighting for survival. As Dr. Jin worked to stabilize their unexpected patient, Day couldn't help but think about how close they had come to losing her. A few more minutes, and she would have died alone in the darkness, never knowing that help had finally arrived. Part 4. Breaking the Barrier. Dr. Jin hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every time he tried to rest, he found himself thinking about their alien patient and rushing back to the medical bay to check on her. Veltari, as they had learned to call her, was unlike anything in his medical training. Her blood was a pale silver color. Her heart had 3 chambers instead of 4, and she seemed to breathe a mixture of gases that would be toxic to humans. Her cellular structure is fascinating, he explained to Captain Day during one of their daily briefings. She's definitely carbon-based like us, but her metabolism runs much slower. That's probably how she survived so long in that pod. Her body was essentially hibernating to conserve energy. Veltari had been awake for most of the second day, but communication was proving almost impossible. She would point at objects and make sounds that meant nothing to the human crew. Sometimes she would draw symbols in the air with her long, delicate fingers, but the humans couldn't understand what she was trying to say. That's when linguist specialist An Rin was called in from her quarters. Rin was a quiet woman who usually spent her time analyzing ancient Earth languages and studying communication patterns from other species they had encountered. She had never worked with a completely unknown alien language before, but she approached the challenge with the same methodical patience that made her good at her job. Languages all have patterns, she explained to Veltari, speaking slowly and clearly even though she knew the alien couldn't understand her yet. We just need to find yours. Rin started with simple concepts. She would point to herself and say Rin over and over until Veltari began to understand that this sound referred to the human female. Then she would point to Veltari and wait. After several attempts, the alien pointed to herself and made a series of sounds that sounded like Veltari. It was a small breakthrough, but it felt huge to everyone watching. Captain Day had assigned crew rotations so that someone was always with Veltari. He didn't want her to feel alone after what she had been through, and he also wanted his people to get used to having an alien aboard their ship. The crew was curious but respectful, bringing her small gifts from their personal belongings and trying to make her feel welcome. Engineer Myung brought her a small mechanical puzzle that he had made in his spare time. Veltari examined it with obvious fascination, her large eyes studying every detail before she began working on the solution. She solved it in less than 5 minutes, then looked at Myung with what could only be described as a smile. She's definitely intelligent, Myung reported to the captain later. Maybe more intelligent than us. Navigator Hana spent hours with Veltari, showing her star charts and images of different worlds. The alien seemed particularly interested in pictures of Earth, pointing at the blue oceans and green continents with obvious wonder. When Hana showed her images of human cities and spacecraft, Veltari became very excited, gesturing rapidly and speaking in her musical language. I think she's trying to tell us about her own people, Hana told the others during their evening briefing. She keeps pointing to the stars and making gestures that look like explosions or destruction. The breakthrough came when Rin figured out how to connect Veltari's language to the ship's computer system. Using a combination of hand gestures, simple drawings, and vocal patterns, she created a basic translation program that could handle simple concepts. The first real conversation was heartbreaking. Home, gone, Veltari managed to say through the computer's mechanical voice. Star died. People scattered. Dr. Jin was monitoring her vital signs during this conversation, and he could see her heart rate increasing as she spoke about her lost homeworld. Take it slow, he advised Rin. This is obviously painful for her. But Veltari seemed determined to tell her story. Through halting, broken phrases, she explained how her people had been studying dark matter when something went wrong. Their star had begun collapsing unexpectedly, and most of her species had died when their homeworld was destroyed. The survivors had scattered across the galaxy, and she had been alone in her damaged pod for what translated to roughly 18 Earth months. Experiment. My fault, she said, her large eyes filling with something that looked like tears. Tried to help. People. Made things worse. Security Officer Seo had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. "It wasn't your fault," he said gently, even though he wasn't sure she could fully understand him yet. "Sometimes bad things happen, even when we're trying to do good." Captain Day decided to share some of humanity's own history with Veltari. He had Hana bring up images of Earth's early space missions, showing her how humans had started with simple rockets and gradually learned to explore their solar system. "We didn't always know what we were doing either," he explained through the translation system. "We made mistakes, we lost people, but we kept trying because we wanted to learn, to explore, to find other life in the universe." Veltari studied the images of human space missions with intense interest. She seemed particularly fascinated by pictures of the first human moon landing, pointing at the astronauts and asking questions that the translation system couldn't quite handle yet. When Seo showed her images of human rescue missions, both on Earth and in space, something seemed to click for her. She looked around at the crew with a new expression, as if she was finally beginning to understand something important. "You came for me," she said slowly through the computer. "Not your people. Why?" The question hung in the air for a moment, before Captain Day answered. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That's enough." Part 5. The Test of Character. Veltari was getting stronger each day. Dr. Jin had figured out the right combination of nutrients for her alien metabolism, and she could now walk around the medical bay without assistance. Her grasp of human language was improving rapidly too, thanks to linguist Rin's patient teaching and the ship's translation computer. She had been listening to the crew's conversations, learning not just their words, but their attitudes, their values, the way they treated each other. The humans were unlike any species she had ever encountered. They seemed to genuinely care about each other's well-being, sharing jokes and meals and small kindnesses that served no practical purpose. It was so different from her own people, the Kethrai, who had been brilliant but solitary, focused entirely on their research and scientific advancement. They had been logical, efficient, but not particularly warm or emotional. Veltari was beginning to think she understood humans when Communications Officer Yeon's voice echoed through the ship's announcement system. "Captain to the bridge. We have a situation." Veltari followed Dr. Jin to the bridge, curious to see what had the crew so concerned. Captain Day was standing in front of the main view screen, staring at an image that made Veltari's blood run cold. It was a Hegemony Confederacy warship. The massive vessel was dark except for a few emergency lights flickering along its hull. Veltari could see that several sections had been damaged, probably by some kind of explosion or system failure. The ship was drifting helplessly, just like her own pod had been. "They're broadcasting a distress signal," Yeon reported. "Life support is failing. Weapon systems are offline. They're requesting immediate assistance." Veltari felt her heart start racing. The Hegemony Confederacy was a military alliance of several aggressive species who controlled a large portion of this galaxy sector. They were known for their brutal conquest tactics and their complete lack of mercy toward anyone they considered weak or inferior. More importantly, they were the same alliance that had refused to help the Kethrai refugees when her homeworld's star began its premature collapse. While her people were dying, the Hegemony had declared that the disaster was not their problem, and had even threatened to destroy any Kethrai ships that entered their territory while seeking help. Veltari watched the human crew's faces, waiting to see how they would react. Surely they would ignore the distress call. The Hegemony had made it clear that they considered humans to be nothing more than primitive upstarts who had no business exploring this part of space. Navigator Hana was the first to speak. "Captain, these are the same people who threatened to fire on any human vessels they encountered in their territory. They called us inferior mammals and told us to go back where we came from." Security Officer Seo nodded grimly. "They've attacked 3 human cargo ships in the past year, destroyed them completely, no survivors. Command has classified them as hostile." Engineer Myung looked up from his console. "Sir, helping them could be seen as an act of aggression by their government. They might think we're trying to steal their technology or capture their crew." Veltari found herself holding her breath. This was it. This was the moment when she would see what humans were really like when their own interests were at stake. Every logical species in the galaxy would either ignore the distress call or use it as an opportunity to capture an enemy vessel. Captain Dai studied the image of the damaged warship for a long moment. Veltari could see the conflict in his eyes as he weighed the risks and benefits of different choices. "How many crew members aboard that ship?" he asked. "Sensors show approximately 200 life signs," Jon replied. "Most of them are weakening. Rapidly." "Captain," Hana said urgently, "we need to think about this carefully. These people have never shown us any mercy. Why should we risk our lives and our mission to help them?" Veltari nodded silently. Hana was making perfect sense. The hegemony had proven they were enemies of both humans and Kethrai. They deserved whatever fate had damaged their ship. But then Captain Dai spoke, and his words changed everything Veltari thought she understood about the universe. "Prep the emergency bay for multiple casualties," he ordered. "Myung, I want maximum power to the rescue systems, SEO, coordinate with their emergency protocols if they have any. We're going in." The bridge fell silent. Veltari stared at the captain in shock, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Sir," Hana said carefully, "are you sure about this? These people would never do the same for us." Day turned to face his crew, and Veltari could see the absolute certainty in his expression. "That's exactly why we have to do it," he said. "Because they wouldn't. Because someone needs to show that there's a better way to live in this galaxy than just looking out for yourself." "But Captain," Sio protested, "they're our enemies. Right now they're people who are going to die if we don't help them," Dee replied. "That's all that matters." Veltari watched in amazement as the human crew moved to obey their captain's orders, despite their obvious concerns. They didn't agree with the decision, but they trusted their leader enough to follow him, even when it seemed foolish. As the new dawn moved toward the damaged hegemony vessel, Veltari realized she was witnessing something that might be unique in the galaxy. These humans were willing to risk their lives to save people who hated them simply because it was the right thing to do. For the first time since her homeworld's destruction, she began to believe that there might be hope for the galaxy after. Part 6. Understanding Humanity. Veltari pressed her face against the medical bay's observation window, watching the chaos unfold in the corridor outside. Human crew members were running back and forth, carrying medical supplies and emergency equipment toward the docking bay, where the hegemony survivors were being brought aboard. She had never seen anything like it. The humans were working with desperate urgency to save people who had spent years threatening them, people who considered humans to be nothing more than primitive animals that didn't deserve to exist in civilized space. Through the translation interface, she could hear the communications between the two ships. The hegemony crew members were suspicious and hostile even as they were being rescued. Some of them actually refused help at first, claiming they would rather die than be saved by inferior species, but the humans kept working anyway. Engineer. Myung was suiting up for what everyone knew was an extremely dangerous mission. The hegemony ship's reactor was on the verge of critical failure, and someone needed to go aboard and stabilize it before it exploded and killed everyone still trapped inside. "Myung, are you sure about this?" Captain Day asked over the comm system. "Their reactor design is completely different from ours. If you make one mistake—" "I've been studying their energy signatures," Myung replied calmly as he checked his equipment one more time. "I think I can figure it out. Besides, if I don't try, those people are going to die." Veltari watched him disappear into the airlock, heading for a ship full of people who would probably shoot him on sight if they weren't so badly injured. She couldn't understand it. The logical thing would be to evacuate whoever they could and let the ship explode. Why risk a valuable crew member for enemies? In the main medical bay, Dr. Jin was working on a hegemony soldier who had multiple fractures and severe burns. The alien soldier was conscious and kept trying to bite Jin whenever he got close enough. His species had sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh, and he was obviously trying to hurt the human doctor who was attempting to save his life. "Hold still," Jin said patiently, adjusting the restraints that kept the soldier from injuring himself or others. "I'm trying to help you." The soldier spat something in his own language that the translation system identified as an extremely offensive insult. He called Jin a soft-skinned parasite and threatened to kill him as soon as he was strong enough to stand. Jin just smiled and continued working. "Yeah, you're welcome," he said quietly, injecting pain medication that would help the soldier heal faster. Veltari moved closer to watch. "Doctor," she said through her translation device, "why do you treat him kindly? He wants to hurt you." Jin looked up from his patient for a moment. "Because he's in pain and scared," he explained. "When people are hurt and frightened, they sometimes lash out at the people trying to help them. It doesn't mean I should stop helping." "But your people and his people are enemies," Veltari pointed out. "His government and my government might be enemies," Jin corrected her. "But he's not a government. He's just a person who got hurt and needs medical attention." Veltari shook her head, trying to process this logic. Among her own people, the Kethrai, decisions had always been made based on practical considerations. If someone was your enemy, you avoided them or defended yourself against them. You didn't risk your own life to save theirs. But humans seem to operate by completely different rules. She watched Security Officer Seo coordinating the evacuation of hegemony crew members, treating each rescued alien with the same professional courtesy he would show to human civilians. When one of the rescued aliens tried to grab his weapon, Seo simply moved it out of reach and continued helping the alien to the medical bay. "They don't trust us," Seo reported to Captain Day. "Some of them think this is a trap, that we're going to interrogate them or use them as prisoners." "Keep treating them with respect," Day replied. "They'll figure out eventually that we're not their enemies." Meanwhile, Engineer Myung's voice crackled over the comm from inside the damaged hegemony ship. "Captain, I'm at the reactor. It's worse than I thought. The whole containment system is compromised. I can stabilize it, but I'm going to need at least 20 minutes. "How much time do we have before it goes critical?" Day asked. "Maybe 15 minutes, maybe less." There was silence on the bridge for a moment. Everyone understood what this meant. Myung was going to risk his life to save people who hated him, and he might not have enough time to save himself. "Myung, get out of there," Day ordered. "We'll evacuate everyone we can and get clear of the explosion." "Negative, Captain. There are still 47 people trapped in the lower sections. If this reactor goes, they all die. I can do this," Veltari found herself moving toward Captain Day without realizing it. "Captain," she said through her translation device, "why do your people do this? The hegemony would never risk their lives for humans. They refused to help my people when we were dying. Why do you help them?" Captain Day looked at her with those calm, steady eyes that she had come to associate with human leadership. "Because they're alive," he said simply. "That's reason enough." The concept was so alien to Veltari that she almost couldn't process it. "But they are your enemies. They would kill you if they could." "Maybe," Dai acknowledged. "But that doesn't change the fact that they're living beings who deserve a chance to survive." Veltari stared at him, trying to understand. Her own species had been logical, practical, always calculating the costs and benefits of every action. They had been brilliant scientists and researchers, but they had never developed this strange human concept of helping others, regardless of personal cost. As she watched the humans continue their rescue operation, risking their lives for people who despised them, she began to realize that she was witnessing something that might be unique in the entire galaxy. These humans weren't just different from other species. They might be the key to changing everything. Part 7. A New Perspective. The weeks following the hegemony rescue had been the most interesting of Veltari's long life. As her body grew stronger and her understanding of human language improved, she found herself becoming part of the crew in ways she had never expected. The humans didn't treat her like a guest or a research subject. They treated her like family. It started with small things. Security Officer Seo had noticed that Veltari spent most of her time alone in the medical bay, staring out the viewport at the stars. One evening, he knocked on her door and asked if she wanted to learn a human card game called poker. "It's about reading people," he explained as he dealt the cards on the small table in the recreation room. "You have to figure out if someone is telling the truth or trying to trick you." Veltari was fascinated. The Ketharai had never developed games of deception because they had always valued pure logic and honesty above everything else. But as CO taught her the rules, she began to understand that this was actually a sophisticated form of social interaction that helped humans learn to understand each other better. "You're getting good at this," CO laughed after she won her third hand in a row. "Your species must be naturally good at reading facial expressions." "We never played games like this," Veltari admitted. "My people believed that deception was inefficient." "Sometimes a little harmless deception can be fun," Seo said, shuffling the cards for another round. "It teaches you to pay attention to the little details that people don't realize they're showing you." Linguist specialist Rin had become Veltari's guide to human culture in ways that went far beyond language. She introduced her to Earth literature, starting with simple stories and gradually working up to more complex works that explored human emotions and relationships. "This one is called To Kill a Mockingbird," Rin explained, handing Veltari a FY tablet with the digital text. "It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult or dangerous." Veltari read the story slowly, using the translation program to help with concepts she didn't understand. The idea of someone risking their reputation and safety to defend a stranger from injustice was familiar to her now, after watching the humans rescue the hegemony crew. But seeing it explored in their literature made her realize that this wasn't just the behavior of one unusual ship's crew. This was a fundamental part of human nature. "Your stories teach values," she observed to Rin one evening as they discussed the book. "They don't just entertain, they show people how to be better." Rin smiled. "That's exactly right. Humans have always used stories to pass down important ideas about how we should treat each other." Navigator Hana had become Veltari's favorite source of information about human exploration and discovery. She would spend hours showing her star charts and mission reports from human expeditions, explaining how Earth's space program had developed over the centuries. "See, here's the interesting thing," Hana said, pointing to records of humanity's first contact with the Centauri colonies. "When we met our first alien civilization, our initial protocol wasn't to establish trade agreements or military alliances. It was to offer medical assistance and educational exchange." Veltari studied the documents with growing amazement. "You offered to share your knowledge for free." "Of course," Hana replied. "That's how civilization advances. When different peoples share what they know, everyone benefits." This was completely different from what Veltari had observed with other spacefaring species. Most civilizations in the galaxy approached first contact as either an opportunity for conquest or a potential threat to be carefully managed. The idea of approaching strangers with offers of help and friendship was almost unheard of. Communications Officer Yeon had access to the most comprehensive records of human diplomatic policies, and she spent several evenings walking Veltari through the official first contact protocols that all human ships were required to follow. "Rule number 1, Yeon read from the manual, assess whether the contacted species requires immediate assistance with life support, medical care, or emergency rescue. All other considerations are secondary to preserving life. Rule number 2, establish peaceful communication and offer cultural exchange opportunities. Share information about human civilization while learning about theirs. Rule number 3, offer technological or medical assistance without demanding anything in return. Help should be given freely to build trust and goodwill." Veltari listened to these rules with growing wonder. "This is how all human ships operate?" "Every single one," Yeon confirmed. "It's been our standard approach for over 200 years. But what if the other species is hostile? What if they try to take advantage of your kindness?" Yeon shrugged. "Then we defend ourselves if we have to, but we always try friendship first. Most of the time it works better than you'd expect." As the days passed, Veltari began to see patterns in everything the humans did. Dr. Jin would spend extra time with patients who were scared or lonely, even when his medical duties were finished. Engineer Myung would help crew members fix personal belongings that had nothing to do with ship operations. Captain Day would listen patiently to complaints and suggestions from the lowest-ranking crew members, treating their opinions with the same respect he showed his senior officers. It wasn't just policy or training. These humans genuinely cared about the well-being of others, even strangers, even enemies. One evening, as Veltari sat in the observation lounge watching the stars drift by, she realized that something had changed inside her. For the first time since her homeworld's destruction, she didn't feel hopeless about the future. The HFY had been scattered across the galaxy, broken and defeated. Most of her people had given up on the idea of rebuilding their civilization, accepting that they would live out their remaining years as refugees and outcasts. But watching these humans, learning about their values and their approach to the universe, Veltari began to believe that there might be another way. Maybe the galaxy didn't have to be a place where different species fought over resources and territory. Maybe it could be something better. For the first time in cycles, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Part 8. The Message Home. Veltari stood in the communications room, staring at the long-range transmitter that could reach across the galaxy. Her hands were shaking slightly as she prepared to do something that could change the future of her entire species. Communications Officer Yeon had given her access to the most powerful transmitter on the ship, capable of sending messages to star systems thousands of light-years away. "Are you sure about this?" Captain Day asked gently. He had been supportive of her decision, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "Once you send this message, there's no taking it back." Veltari nodded, her large eyes reflecting the glow of the control panels around her. "My people need to know what I've learned. They need to know that there's hope." For weeks she had been thinking about her scattered people. After their homeworld's destruction, the surviving HFY had fled to different parts of the galaxy, settling on remote worlds and space stations where they could continue their research in isolation. They had given up on the idea of rebuilding their civilization, accepting that they would spend the rest of their lives as refugees. But Veltari had seen something on this human ship that changed everything. She had witnessed a way of living that her people had never experienced, a philosophy that could help them become more than they had ever been before. "The transmission will take several days to reach the nearest HFY colony," Yeon explained, making final adjustments to the communication array. "And it might be weeks before you get responses from the more distant settlements." Veltari took a deep breath and activated the recording system. She had been practicing this message in her head for days, but now that the moment had arrived, she felt overwhelmed by the importance of what she was about to say. "My fellow HFY," she began, speaking in her native language while the ship's computer prepared translations. "This is Veltari, daughter of the research station that was lost when our star died. I know many of you believe I perished with the others, but I survived, and I have discovered something that will change how we see the universe." She paused, thinking about everything she had experienced over the past few months. How could she possibly explain in words what it felt like to be saved by strangers who owed her nothing? How could she describe the way humans treated each other with kindness and respect, even in difficult circumstances? "I have been rescued by a species called humans," she continued. "They found me dying in the void between stars, and they risked their lives to save me. But that is not the extraordinary part. The extraordinary part is why they saved me." Veltari looked at Captain Day, who nodded encouragingly. She knew he couldn't understand her native language, but his presence gave her strength to continue. "These humans don't explore space to conquer new territories or gather resources for themselves. They explore because they want to meet other forms of life and learn from them. They have a concept they call humanity that goes beyond their species. It means caring for others, even strangers, even enemies, simply because they are alive and deserve compassion." She thought about Engineer Myung risking his life to save the hegemony crew, about Dr. Jin treating wounded enemies with the same care he showed friends, about the way the entire crew had welcomed her into their family without asking for anything in return. "I have watched them save people who hate them. I have seen them share their knowledge freely without demanding payment or advantage. I have learned that they believe the universe is better when different species work together, instead of fighting against each other." The recording continued for several more minutes as Veltari described specific examples of human behavior that had amazed her. She talked about their literature, their games, their approach to diplomacy and first contact. She explained how different this was from everything the HFY had experienced with other galactic civilizations. "My people, we have always prided ourselves on our logic and our scientific achievements," she said near the end of her message, "but we never learned what these humans call empathy. We never understood that true civilization isn't about how much knowledge you can gather, but about how you treat others who have less than you do." She looked directly into the camera, knowing that her words would eventually reach HFY settlements scattered across dozens of star systems. "I am sending you the coordinates of Earth, the human homeworld. I'm also sending detailed information about their culture, their values, and their approach to interspecies relations. I believe that if we can learn from them, we can rebuild our civilization into something better than it ever was before." Veltari's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. "For the first time since our homeworld died, I have hope for our future. Not just hope that we can survive, but hope that we can thrive and become part of something larger than ourselves. These humans have shown me that the galaxy doesn't have to be a cold, hostile place where everyone fights for survival. It can be a community where different species help each other reach their full potential." She ended the recording and looked at Captain Day. "It's done," she said simply. "How do you think they'll respond?" Jon asked. Veltari considered the question carefully. "Some will be skeptical. My people have been hurt by other species before, and they won't trust easily. But others will be curious, and curiosity has always been our greatest strength." Over the following days, as the New Dawn continued its journey toward Earth, responses began arriving from HFY settlements across the galaxy. The first replies were cautious and questioning, asking for more details about these humans and their motivations. But as more messages arrived, Veltari could sense a change in tone. Her people were beginning to feel something they hadn't experienced in years: hope for a future that might be better than their past. The scattered children of a dead world were starting to believe they could build something new. Part 9. A New Beginning. The transport shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere as Veltari pressed her face against the small viewport, watching in wonder as the blue and green world grew larger beneath them. She had seen images of Earth during her time on the New Dawn, but nothing had prepared her for the overwhelming beauty of seeing it with her own eyes. "First time seeing a living planet in person?" asked Dr. Jin, who was sitting across from her in the shuttle. "I remember my first view of Earth after growing up on a space station. It takes your breath away." Veltari nodded, unable to find words in any language to describe what she was feeling. Her own homeworld had been beautiful, too, with its purple skies and silver forests, but that world was gone forever. This was different. This was a new beginning. Captain Day sat beside her, looking as calm and steady as always, but she could tell he was excited to be returning home after months in deep space. The entire crew of the New Dawn had become like family to her during the journey, and now they were introducing her to their world. "The air might smell different at first," Navigator Hana warned her. "Earth has a lot of organic compounds in the atmosphere that other worlds don't have. Oxygen from plants, salt from the oceans, all kinds of things that make it unique." The shuttle touched down at the diplomatic landing facility near Geneva, where representatives from Earth's government were waiting to meet their first official alien visitor. Veltari had spent weeks preparing for this moment, learning about human customs and protocols, practicing her speeches in multiple Earth languages. But as the shuttle doors opened and she took her first step onto Earth's surface, all her preparation seemed to disappear. The sensation of breathing unfiltered alien air was overwhelming. It was rich and complex, filled with scents she had never experienced before. There was something green and growing, something clean and fresh that must have been the wind carrying. Moisture from distant oceans. "How does it feel?" Security Officer Seo asked, grinning as he watched her reaction. "Sweet," she said simply, surprising herself with the word. "The air tastes sweet." Captain Day stood beside her as a small group of human officials approached. They moved slowly and respectfully, clearly trying not to overwhelm her with too much attention at once. She appreciated their consideration, even though she was no longer the frightened, dying refugee they had rescued months ago. Ambassador Veltari, said a woman who introduced herself as Director Chen from Earth's Department of Interspecies Relations. Welcome to Earth. We're honored to have you here. Ambassador. The title still felt strange to her. 6 months ago, she had been a failed researcher drifting alone in space, waiting to die. Now she was representing her entire species in historic first contact negotiations. The transformation seemed impossible, but here she was. The first few days on Earth were a whirlwind of meetings, ceremonies, and cultural exchanges. Veltari was introduced to world leaders, scientists, and diplomats from every major nation. Everyone wanted to meet the alien who had chosen to work with humanity instead of returning to her own people. But the most important moment came on her 4th day on Earth, when she stood in the same communications facility where humans had been, receiving messages from HFY colonies across the galaxy. The responses to her original transmission had been overwhelming. Dozens of settlements had expressed interest in establishing contact with Earth, and 3 colonies had already sent ships toward human space. Veltari looked into the camera that would broadcast her message across the galaxy, knowing that this might be the last time she spoke to her scattered people as one of them. After today, she would be something new, a bridge between 2 civilizations. My fellow HFY, she began, speaking in her native language while the translation system prepared versions in dozens of other galactic languages. I stand now on the surface of Earth, breathing the air of an alien world that has become my home. Captain Day stood just outside the camera's view, along with Dr. Jin, Navigator Hana, and the rest of the crew who had become her chosen family. Their presence gave her the strength to continue. When I was rescued from the void, I thought I understood why they had saved me. I assumed they wanted something from me, that they saw some advantage in helping a HFY researcher. But I was wrong. They saved me not because I was useful, but because I was alive. In all my research into the cosmos, in all our species' pursuit of knowledge and logic, I never discovered anything as rare as that simple truth. She paused, thinking about everything she had learned during her time with humans. The card games, with Officer Seo that taught her about trust and friendship. The literature sessions with Specialist Rin that showed her how stories could change hearts and minds. The star charts with Navigator Hana that revealed humanity's true purpose in exploring the galaxy. These humans have shown me that intelligence without compassion is incomplete. Knowledge without empathy is hollow. We prided ourselves on being the most logical species in the galaxy, but we never learned the most important lesson of all, that the universe is better when we help each other instead of standing alone. Veltari looked directly into the camera, speaking to HFY across dozens of star systems who were listening to her words. Come to Earth. Learn what I have learned. Meet these remarkable beings who explore not to conquer, but to connect. Together we can rebuild not just our civilization, but something better. A galactic community built on the human principle that every life has value. As she finished recording, Veltari stepped outside the communications facility with Captain Day and looked up at the night sky. The stars that had once seemed cold and distant now sparkled with possibility. Somewhere among those points of light, her people were making decisions that would shape the future of multiple civilizations. Do you think they'll come, Captain? Day asked. Veltari smiled, feeling the sweet earth air fill her lungs. They'll come, and when they do, they'll discover what I discovered, that the universe is much warmer than we ever imagined. Above them, the stars shone with the promise of connection, exploration, and hope, all.